Erev Tov from here in Jerusalem, Boker Tov, wherever you are, or Tzoraim Tovim. It's wonderful to be together again for one of Chidush's webinars. And when I say Chidush's webinars, I want to express our gratitude and appreciation of the partnership that we have with the Ruach Chidush, Rabbis and Cantors for Religious Freedom and Equality in Israel, and the J-Plan, the Jewish Pluralism Legal Action Network, and members of the board and members of the entities are with us on this call, as always, and the great collaborative effort that we have with the American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists. So for those who have not been with us on a regular basis, we alternate between issues of general interest, of spiritual interest, and let me just mute all, of a general interest, of spiritual, rabbinic interest, and topics that involve legal interest. And there is something for everybody, and all these topics are presented in a popular way so that everybody can enjoy them. So today we are going to hear, when Professor Tal can pull himself away from the plenum of the Knesset, and hopefully it'll be soon, we'll be hearing some, testimony from the field, from the battleground, on a number of pending legislative pieces and conflicts and debates on matters of religion and state. And because Professor Tal found himself in a bind with the Knesset schedule changing and him being under pressure, I shouldn't say under pressure, that's an understatement, being forced to heed first and foremost to his commitment to the Knesset and to the faction, we'll do something today that we haven't done in a long time, and that is take your questions, your queries, your comments regarding the larger questions of religion and state in Israel, pluralism, and I will attempt to respond to the questions to the best of my ability. And of course, I promise that if there are questions that I can't answer based on my experience and knowledge to date, I will be providing you with an answer at a later date. So until we have Professor Tal with us, I suggest that any of you who has something that is of concern to you in the larger framework of religion and state in Israel, raise your hand. Use the reactions button and raise your hand and unmute yourself and present it to us. And as I said, I'll do my best, again, in a relatively uncommon way, namely, I'll try and keep it short. So go ahead. Does anyone have something that you want to raise that is of interest to you and you feel would be of interest to others as well? Okay, Jan, you are writing, what are the consequences internationally and politically of the Haredization of Israel, also for American Jewry? Well, thank you, Jen, for the question. Obviously, we are dealing with this question on a number of levels. One level is the essence of democracy, civil liberties, human dignity, equality in Israel. Haredization of Israel, Haredization is sort of a general term, but the Central Bureau of Statistics published a couple of years ago published their projections for the year 2065. And like any responsible statistical governmental arm, they are using a number of assumptions at different levels. And the sort of middle projection is that by the year 2065, if nothing dramatic happens, whereas currently the Haredi community, the Haredi sector, amounts to approximately, let's say, 10% of the Israeli population, by the year 2065, they will constitute over 30% of the Israeli population. That projection brought one of the leading economists at the Ministry of Finance a few years back, when those projections were publicized, to write an economic analysis of those demographic projections. And the economic bottom line that he projected, based not just on the numbers, but of course on the fact that the ultra-Orthodox sector, and particularly men in the ultra-Orthodox sector, are drastically underrepresented in the workforce. And even the extent to which they are represented, for the most part, are not, let's say, producing engagements, but rather communal work within the community in educational or merchant or some other positions that are more common than others in the Haredi community for men. So based on that, and on the fact that the Haredi community as a rule refuses to instruct their men or their boys in what's called standard curriculum, basic curriculum such as math, science, English. The combination of these two elements results with an economic analysis, and as I said, not just by abstract economists, but by senior people in the Ministry of Finance, and by people such as Professor Frankel, who was the governor of the Bank of Israel, and as you know, was the deputy governor of the Federal Bank in America, to conclude that Israel, at a certain point along the way, would be nearing bankruptcy, because there is no way that the economy can sustain itself in spite of the wonderful, glowing, reviews that one reads when one reads Startup Nation or other great articles about scientific progress and discovery. So the projection is that Israel, we are with Professor Tal. All right, so I'll stop and I'll continue afterwards and we'll take more questions. Thank you, Professor Tal. Thank you, Alon. We really appreciate the fact that under such political stress, you are with us. And I explained that you'll probably be with us only for a short time.
Well, thank you so much, Rabbi Regev. It's an honor to be here. These are indeed, it's money time for our coalition. If by the 14th of November, a budget is not passed, this very, very unique coalition, which you've managed to cobble together, will disperse and we'll have elections. And I'm confident that we will pass a budget, but it requires all of us to be here all the time, because when you have a 61-59 razor-thin majority, every finger counts. So my trusted advisor is here next to me, and if I have to go vote in the Finance Committee, I will do so. There's sort of a tornado, but for now I have been given a half hour off for good behavior. So I understand that we're interested in discussing a little bit about how matters of religion and state are starting to take form in this new government, if any new policies might be identified. Is that our topic?
That is very true, but maybe just to start, you'll be willing to focus on a specific point, which I know is of interest to many on this call. And you should know you have many enthusiasts on the, among the participants. Your reputation precedes you, especially in the conservative movement, but beyond. And so many are interested in in what your projection is regarding the Kotel. Are we nearing a reinstatement of the agreement? Is it going to be eroded? Is it going to be blocked? What you expressed a few days ago, you expressed some sort of optimistic outlook as to what's happening with it. So let's start with a particular and then move to the more general account.
Okay, I would like to, before that, preface my remarks by saying I was indeed raised in a conservative Jewish community in North Carolina, and I was always taught that we of the Jewish faith do not deify places, that we don't know the burial site of Moses, our greatest prophet, because we don't want to turn into some sort of a shrine and turn into some sort of cult of personality. And so I've never been one of these people who wants to make too big a deal about the Western Wall. It has tremendous historic significance, symbolic significance. It was the aspiration of Jews for centuries to come there. But personally, I always felt there were other places in Israel which may have been more important. However, once the lines were drawn and the Western Wall became essentially an ultra-Orthodox synagogue, it became clear that this was a litmus test for decency, religious freedom, pluralism within Israel. I have 3 daughters. They were all very active in Noam, which is the Israeli equivalent of USY. And especially when the 2 of them were chair of this organization in high school, I would get up at 6 a.m. and drive them to the Women of the Wall, who convene every Rosh Chodesh, and watch with great trepidation and concern as they tried to conduct prayers with the many diverse kinds of women who attend those prayers. And it was sort of very, very peculiar looking back on that period, because both of my daughters were combat soldiers in the Israeli army doing somewhat dangerous tasks. And it seemed to me that I never really worried about them. Maybe I should have when they were under the line of fire. But when I sent them into the conflict zone, which is called the Western Wall, I really did worry not only that they would get physically harassed and beaten, as is often the case, but that emotionally and psychologically they would come out scarred, that somehow the pervasive hate which has come to inform the holiest site in Judaism would leave them tainted. And therefore, I really believe it's so critical that we move forward expeditiously to work out some resolution. And indeed, the government of Israel had worked out a compromise, not anybody's favorite arrangement, but that's the nature of compromises, but at least it did give those of us who wish to pray in an egalitarian fashion a significant, I think, very, very compelling corner of this last remnant of Solomon's temple. And I must say that it was with great regret at the time when because of extremists in the ultra-Orthodox community, this very, very hard negotiated compromise was jettisoned by the prime minister because of his political exigencies. And that's why when the new government was established and we set forward a platform we call Kavei Yesod, the basic foundational principles of our government, implementing this so-called Mitveh HaKotel, the Kotel arrangement, was one of the commitments we made. But having seen other commitments and governments not necessarily met, I decided that I would not necessarily wait. And I submitted a law to the Knesset, which basically took this agreement and all the detailed aspects of it, and who's going to run it, and what's the organization, and what is the physical parameters, and turned it into a bill, a legislation, with the hope of never ever having to try to shepherd it through the Knesset, but figured that if the government starts to dilly-dally and to find excuses for inaction, then we in the Knesset can have our role to push them forward. Now, recently, and perhaps we'll talk a little bit more about it if you'd like, I've been active on this issue of trying to ensure greater freedom in the area of kashrut and ensuring kosher certification. And when I was, it was something of a political battle. And part of the reason why in the end, I decided to take a strategic step backwards were assurances that I received. And I'd rather not out my highest source, but the very, very highest sources in the Israeli government, that immediately subsequent to the passing of the bill, of the budget, which has to happen, like I said, by November 4th. We hope that'll happen by the 6th or 7th. Immediately subsequent, the Israeli government is moving to implement it. And just yesterday here in the Knesset, one floor below us, there was a meeting of the very first, it's in Hebrew, we call it a shtulah. It's not really a lobby, it's sort of a caucus of Israeli legislators who believe in religious pluralism. Rabbi Gilad Kariv, along with two other members of Knesset, spearheaded this initiative. And the first speaker there was Minister Nachman Shai, who's the Minister of Diaspora Affairs. And I'm switching computers, I'm told, by my assistant. Give me a second. Okay. So, thank you for that, Sneer. So we had the meeting here, and amongst the, I should say, the important messages which Minister Nachman Shai conveyed was that indeed his ministry is working with the Prime Minister's office to make sure this happens quickly. We are aware of the symbolic significance of this issue for Jews around the world, Jews in Israel as well, but particularly for Jews who come to Jerusalem on a pilgrimage, would like to pray someplace together in the way in which they are accustomed to, and it is unimaginable that the state of Israel wouldn't offer them that opportunity. And I'm hopeful that in a matter of months, this will be possible in a new legal arrangement. And then we can all say that in the area of religious pluralism, this is yet another area where this government of change has brought a blessing and an end to 10 years of, how should I say it diplomatically? I don't want to be too bombastic, but certainly polarization and a marginalization of the Jewish streams in Israel and around the world.
Thank you, Alon. We actually, many of us had the privilege to hear Minister Shai a few weeks ago, and indeed, it was a very encouraging message, and we certainly felt that we have a friend in that position in the government. So now to the larger picture. What would you like to share with us in terms of your expectations for this government to be advancing in the area of religion and state? You mentioned kashrut. Of course, we can talk about some of the pending issues such as who is a Jew and the Minister of Religious Services initiative, which is not a pluralistic plan, but rather just enhancing the Orthodox control over conversion, the issue of draft, and any other issue that you feel. You're still with us? Yeah. Okay, we don't hear you. Something about the microphone. No?
Unmuting makes a big difference. Okay, so we're back.
Very well. So what's the larger picture? What are the chances that this government will actually make a difference, and in what areas, and where wouldn't it make a difference?
Okay, so I want to start by giving us some historical context. As a professor, I feel like it's important to be a little less populistic than we often are on these issues. Let's remember where all this began. It was in 1947 that David Ben-Gurion faced a political conundrum. 10 years earlier, when the British had offered something of a partition plan, he was blindsided by the Agudat Yisrael, the ultra-Orthodox or Haredi party, which came out against a partition because they didn't feel that a Jewish state was appropriate and that there was no political solution to the Jewish situation, but rather had to be from intervention from God. 10 years later, after the Holocaust, they were willing to see things a little bit differently, but they're politicians. And in order to ensure their support for what was emerging as the UN partition plan and to provide a coordinated, unified front, Ben-Gurion wrote a very famous letter. At the time, he was head of the Jewish Agency, which was the ersatz Jewish Israeli government at the time, and he offered the ultra-Orthodox 4 assurances with regard to what religion and state would be like in the new Jewish state. And he said, well, on the one hand, Shabbat is going to be a national day of rest, and we will not have any public transportation or anything beyond that we have already. We will have kashrut in all government and official institutions. He talked about religious autonomies in Orthodox communities and the like. And the fourth issue, I'll have to think of in a second, but I'm sure you can.
Education.
I mentioned education is autonomy. Anyway, but the point was that this has been the so-called status quo ever since. I think that many of us realize that what was at the time a political exigency should not have turned into a modus vivendi for the Jewish state. And when we sing Hatikva and talk about being free in our homeland, as the Orthodox population shifted, remember at the time, ultra-Orthodox Judaism was extremely small in numbers and very, very marginal in political influence. And the people who spoke for Orthodoxy were modern Orthodox or Zionist religious, as we call them here, who were much more integrated in society, not nearly as insular, and were not nearly as extreme. And so Israelis were more or less willing to continue. But this has changed ever since 1977, since a Begin government gave greater opportunities for ultra-Orthodox to opt out of the job market and to study and the like. So that brings us to the question about what is the government going to do? Now, I would like to see the government to be bold and to jettison, to really say, we are no longer bound by this letter from 1947 and that the Jewish state has to evolve. And we better do it now, because this particular government, which is unique in that it doesn't have any political parties from any religious sects. Let's remember that the Yamina party has several Orthodox members, but it was designed to be a right-wing alternative to the religious Zionist parties. So without a party who is committed to Orthodoxy, we have the opportunity to maybe make some changes that would be impossible in the past and which will be impossible in the future if you look at the way demographic changes are happening in Israel. So I believe, as we say in Jewish tradition, this is et ratzon, it's sort of a time of grace, and that we have to move expeditiously and boldly. Now, having said that, there is, everybody in his expression in Hebrew, everybody has their own Beit Knesset, their own synagogue they go to, and I have my conservative one, and they expect me to do certain things, but there are Orthodox members in the Yamina party in particular who feel that they can't push too far. Now, we have the Minister of Religious Services, Matan Kahana. He's a former combat pilot and has been relatively bold, has taken an enormous amount of heat from the ultra-Orthodox establishment, and also some of the more right-wing religious figures in the Zionist movement. And he came through with a program to what he called to privatize or break the monopoly of the Israeli rabbinate in the area of kashrut. I'll open up a parenthesis for those who don't know. Over the years, the monopoly which the rabbinate has on kashrut has actually, as might be expected, produced enormous amount of corruption and almost protectionism, where businesses are required to pay large sums of money under the table in order to receive a kashrut license. And we all recognize that public confidence in the kashrut system in Israel has an all-time low amongst Orthodox people. And so his notion was, we're going to create a system where rabbis who've been recognized can go out and form their own certification program. The rabbinate will be a regulator now. They won't be actually the ones running it. And this will open things up. And that's a great idea for two reasons. One, that's the best way to stop corruption, is to have an alternative kashrut certificate where you don't have to pay money under the table, and we might give restaurants a break. And by the way, I'm not repeating unfounded allegations. My family, my wife in particular, and our brother set up a coffee chain with 130 branches in Israel, and many of them did not get a kashrut license because they couldn't afford it, or they just were unwilling to suffer the indignity of being blackmailed. So we really needed to change this, and that's a good thing. But there were those of us who hoped that this, if already opening it up and creating opportunities, why not allow other religious streams, conservative, reform, vegan friendly, as far as I'm concerned, offer a kashrut label. But this was not in the coalitional agreement. And so when I went in front of the new committee that was set up for religious services and spoke about my displeasure, I spoke in ecological terms about the importance of biodiversity, and that creates a richer system, and nobody should see the addition of a non-Orthodox kashrut system as a threat. Nobody has to go in that restaurant or buy those products, but it would be, I think, a healthy move forward. The Minister of Religious Affairs came out strongly against, and we had a battle of tweets, as one does, and it was probably pretty good for him and his base, and it was probably pretty good for me and my base. But the goal is not to be popular amongst Israeli conservative Reform Jews. The goal is to get things done. And as a result of some behind-the-scenes negotiations, we have started a dialogue with the Ministry of Religious Affairs for the first time, and I'm very hopeful that we will be able to do more. I want to say something which is going to be voted on in a few minutes, so I can maybe sort of leak it now, but there is something in the Israeli political culture, I'm not sure it's a healthy thing, but it's been around for years, called Coalitional Money. Basically, these are funds which the Treasury Ministry uses to bribe members of Knesset to support the budget and allows them to support projects which are important to them. If we were not in the Jewish framework, I would say that we'd call it pork, but God forbid, it's totally kosher, so it's allowed by Israeli law. So all of us had a bit of money that we might be able to direct to projects that were important to us. In Israel, we have a very bizarre situation as a result of the Supreme Court case where rabbis who are non-Orthodox, who serve in regional councils, not in cities and other places, receive funding via the Ministry of Culture. And that way, the Supreme Court ruling, which said you have to give some money to the non-Orthodox streams, the Supreme Court got its response that was reasonable, and the ultra-Orthodox did not have to taint the Religious Affairs Ministry with funds. And it happens that the head of the Cultural Ministry is my dear friend, Chili Trooper, who's a member of the Blue and White Party like me. His father is a renowned rabbi who created an organization, Geshem, to bring Jews of all perspectives together. So he gets it. And he was very happy to have his budget increased. And I hope by the next day, follow us on Facebook. We hopefully will have an announcement that the budget, which is available for Reform and conservative rabbis in Israel from the government coffers, will have been increased by this government of change. And I just want to make the point that this doesn't happen on its own, that the fact that there are, for the first time, bona fide, organic, legitimate representatives of different streams of Judaism. I'm talking in particular of Rabbi Gilad Kariv, who is a magnificent spiritual leader, but maybe even better chairman of our Judiciary Committee. And I've sat in many, many of his hearings, and he's masterful as he shepherds legislation forward. And I would consider myself a somewhat less worthy representative of the conservative movement, but I am the gabbai of a synagogue for 15 years, so that counts for something. So hopefully the fact that we care about these issues and that we take umbrage when those who don't understand what non-Orthodox Judaism is disparage us. Just last week, there was what we call a Hatzah L'Seder, a special hearing in the Knesset plenary on the issue of the recent violence against women at the wall, where I spoke, and Mossi Raz, who was a member from Merit, spoke. Gilad Kariv actually chose to not speak, but when he was attacked really, really vituperously by the ultra-Orthodox party members who were there, he did respond on the rostrum. So we are trying to take our struggle for recognition, for religious tolerance and sanity to the political arena where it belongs. And I think this particular Knesset is unique. It has more green members than any other Knesset has in the past, and that's my usual identity. But on this particular issue, I'm all in. And I would hope that this is the first step, this kashrut reform. And I'm thinking actually of making a strategic switch to sit on the Committee for Religious Services so that we can start making the necessary changes, so that it'll be an incremental thing. And again, we're not going to get everything we want. But hopefully when this government passes in 4 years, hopefully replaced by something even better, we will have concrete achievements for Jewish pluralism in Israel. And I think we're already starting.
What you said about more funding for non-Orthodox rabbis under the category of neighborhood rabbis and regional rabbis is, of course, extremely, promising and encouraging. But is this part of the 40 million shekel package? That's beyond that. So the good news includes what also Nachman Shai shared with us, and that is that under his authority in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a package of 40 million shekels for Jewish renewal, which would benefit the non-Orthodox streams, etc., would be applied.
You're precise there. I guess we felt, sort of a one-upmanship. If the Labor Party And let's be honest about it. It was really the spirit of Gilad Karib who pushed for that kind of commitment. Blue and white had to step up at the plate and do something, even if it's not quite of the same magnitude, but we're just getting started. And I hope that we will soon be able to take care of this. I'm sorry, there's phones going off, and I've been warned you can have this conversation, but don't go more than 3 feet away from your telephone. So
right.
Are there questions?
So beyond the money, can we go to some of the more foundational battles, whether it's about the draft law? Do you see anything happening on that front? What about marriage? What about who is a Jew? What about, you mentioned labor? What about public transportation on Shabbat? I mean, anything that you feel would be emerging in a way that interests you and should interest us.
Okay, there's this expression in Hebrew, tafasta merubelo tafasta. You try to do too much, you end up doing nothing at all. So I think we need to prioritize and figure out where our opportunities lie. Now, we were all encouraged when the same minister, Natan Kahana, who was so unwelcoming on my efforts to create pluralistic kashrut, made a very, very bold statement about the inability of the Israeli government to force people to get married in rabbinically or Orthodox rabbinically approved ceremonies, and that we had to give people some space because he realizes that young Israelis are opting out. I think it's probably half the weddings that are in Israel, certainly, and it's not just amongst the secular and the traditional, also in Orthodoxy. They don't like some of the constraints which are placed on them, and so they can go to anybody to get married. You know, halakha does not require us to have a rabbi marry you. And so this is happening, and I think that he is willing. So I would say in marriage, I think that's the next battlefront because we have partners. I think that this is an area, because he doesn't have to conflict with halakha, or we can create an area which is halachically acceptable. I would hope to see a day when you, Rabbi Regev, will be able to conduct ceremonies just as well as an Orthodox chief rabbi or anybody else who claims to have spiritual authority. I think that's something we can do based on his thing. I haven't sat down with the minister and talked with him. We all want to get through the next week or two, push the kashrut reform through, because that does weaken the rabbin. Let's look at the big picture. This is they're fighting a tooth and nail. So the fact that they would take a hit will create perhaps an opportunity. But I think that is an area where we can do better. Now, in terms of who is a Jew, that's a complicated issue. But I think in many areas already we can see it. And let's remember that the Minister of Interior, who is the key player, this is Ayelet Shaked. On the one hand, she is a secular Israeli in Yemen. On the other hand, she has aspirations to be maybe one day prime minister or whatever, positions that will require her to endear herself to Orthodox circles. So it's not clear how bold that she's going to be. But let's remember, she's going to change her job soon enough, okay? If this government stays in place in 2 years, there's going to be a little bit of a rotation, and we're going to see a new prime minister, and we're going to see a new minister of justice. It gives me a little bit nervous because it's the same Shaked, and we'll see a new minister of interior. And that's the time when I think we can actually make big progress there. So it's, again, I think it's looking soberly at the picture for opportunities. I feel like I'm giving a very political talk. I think we should talk just a minute, though, about really what should be of everybody's interest. First of all, I want to invite everybody. I'm told that as of the 1st of November, there's going to be dramatic changes in the COVID constraints for visitors. So those people have been waiting for a long time to come back. And I see my dear friend Ellen Stu Masters. You probably can come here, get your 3rd shot in America, and you can come here. And without any delays, you can come see all your dear friends. We're waiting for you. But I think we should all make sure that people come here and visit, because this is a special year in Israel. This is a Shnat Shemitah. It's a sabbatical year. It's a year when we are trying to let the earth rest a little bit. And in all of our efforts to increase our influence in Israel, let us not let Orthodoxy define who we are. Let our tradition define who we are. Let us be proud Jews. And we'll have the fights in the Knesset. You have representatives there, but spiritual leaders and rabbis and people that are on this call need to send the message around that next week in Glasgow, the nations of the world convene to talk about how we're going to save this planet of ours. And Israel will be sending a delegation with the Prime Minister and the Minister of Environment. And just today, I found out that the Knesset is sending a 3-person delegation, assuming that we complete the budget vote on time next week. and I'll be amongst them. And I think that this convergence of this moment of truth for climate action that we're all waiting for and Shnat Shemitah are two sides of the same coin. And that the Jewish tradition, and now is the time to talk about it because we're all reading Bereshit every Saturday morning, and some of us during the week as well. And, you know, after you go through the Garden of Eden, and we're supposed to protect and to work and to protect, and then the Noah's Ark and what that means for biodiversity. And then, of course, what I think is the most underrated story in the Bible, which is, of course, the first discussion in history about carrying capacity between Abraham and Lot's shepherds. These are issues that we talk about every day. And the book of Genesis is really I would say almost a primer in environmental ethics. And that's during the year of Shemitah, when we are asked to really give the earth a chance to rest and remember, get a sense of perspective and forgive debts and all these kind of things. This is the time to come to Israel and celebrate our earth and our little corner of this amazing planet. And hopefully we can do better to preserve it. And that's another issue, which is not one that we want to leave to anybody else. It's a Jewish issue. And I hope that we will be reasonable stewards of the land and reasonable representatives of this important Jewish commitment.
Well, I think everybody appreciates this extra bit that combines your Zionism and your scholarly expertise. So thank you. Jane Sasswine, a longtime leader in the Reconstructionist movement, is asking about the fact that Israel is refusing to accept the conversions of individuals in Uganda, the Abayudaya, and in which is done under the auspices of the conservative Masorti movement, and in Guatemala under the auspices of the World Union for Progressive Judaism. Is there a chance to make that issue more prominent and press more for inclusion of those Jewish communities, emerging Jewish communities, and these Jews by choice?
I believe that the answer to that question is yes. We have 2 weeks ahead of us that we have to get through, and then I think we'll sit down and try to prioritize and try to feel out where there might be some openness. This is the kind of decision which really only needs a few clerks in the Ministry of Absorption working with the Ministry of Interior. And I'm very delighted that the Blue and White Party has Israel's first Ethiopian minister, Peninnah Tamano-Shato, who has an additional distinction of being a graduate of my Department of Public Policy, was an extraordinary student, really finished with honors. So she's a former student. She didn't listen to me then, she doesn't really listen to me now, but I think on this issue, this is one where we might be able to get some traction. And she's a very, very assertive, confident, and brilliant young woman. And I would like to let her spearhead that particular effort. I don't think it has to be done by us. It's a question of immigration. And I think it's outrageous that those conversions are second guessed. I think that we all have to remember that at the end of the day, there's only one real authority on the issue of conversion, and that's the book of Ruth. And if my people are your people, and people are willing to come to Israel and throw in their fate with the Jewish people after they've undergone conversions, I don't think we need to start trying to decide that my conversion is bigger or better than yours. So yes, I think that's something we could move forward, and I appreciate the question. Jane, politics is the art of the possible. We'll push the envelope, see how far we get. I think I can take one more question, then I've just been signaled 2 minutes.
All right. So the head of your party is Minister of Defense Benny Gantz. One of the key challenges facing this government, and has been facing the governments for decades, is will the Haredi do their share in the defense of the country? So far, they haven't. And so far, all legislative attempts have, in truth, been a sham. I don't think that Minister Gantz really intends to enforce enlistment on Haredi. So what's your take?
First of all, I think if you have two critical areas which are necessary to integrate ultra-Orthodox into Israeli life, and particularly to the modern Israeli economy, one of them involves the issue of workplace and encouraging people to work, and the other one is encourage people to go to the military. Of those two, I want to start with the workplace. That's more important, I believe, in the long term. Having said that, I disagree. I think that Benny is very, very committed to increasing the number of ultra-Orthodox soldiers. It's already happening. The question is, how do you coax this natural transition along? And most of all, how do you protect the brave men, and unfortunately just men, it's not women yet, who decide to, how should I put it, defy Orthodox expectations to go to yeshiva and say, no, after 18 years of study, I would like to go and defend the country. More and more of those people are doing it, but when they come home on the weekend, they are harassed, beaten up, and shamed. And this is something which I think that is intolerable. But I disagree. I think Benny Gantz has the ability to, one of the advantages of him, and one of the reasons I believe, I think somebody's
yes, let me just mute.
Hi, how are you?
It's okay.
Good, how are you? How's everything?
Okay, thanks, Gil. So the point I want to make is one of the advantages that Benny Gantz has. Grew up in an Orthodox household. His grandmother is Haredi. He has a ability to communicate with all sectors of the community. And I think if you ask me that question in a year or two, I'll be able to give you a much more solid answer because there's something on the table now. And he recently reported on it. But I believe that, yes, we are going to see a gradual increase. And let's remember that 50% of secular Israelis aren't serving in the army either. So let's be a little bit less self-righteous. But yes, this is a very important measure. It's not fair. Speaking as a father of 3 daughters who did full, extra years of service in dangerous conditions, there's an equity issue here as well. And young Israelis need to know that everybody has skin in the game. Ori, I have to sign off here.
All right.
All of you for coming, and sorry for the crazy circumstances, but
we appreciate very much that under those crazy circumstances you've been with us. I explained before you came on the webinar that we have agreed to sort of separate the issues, and we'll find the time to share with our participants the other area that you are so concerned about and are a pioneer in exploring and presenting and sharing, and that's the issue of population growth. We'll do that.
No problem. 35 minutes of Alon Tal is enough for anybody. This should be more than enough. Thank you so much. I wish you all a good day. And oh, by the way, if you still haven't had enough, this coming Sunday evening at, I believe it comes out to be 8 o'clock Israel time, I'll be having a Zoom discussion on other issues completely, on the budget and about climate change and what Israel's going to do as it moves towards the Glasgow conference. So if you go on my Facebook page, first of all, follow me, like me, whatever you're supposed to do and those kind of things. And feel free to join us on Sunday evening. We're having these sort of monthly discussions because from my perspective, Israel has no geographical representation. We're not like the United States. So I have to decide for myself who my constituents are. And I'm sure that the people who are involved in Chidush and are on this phone are absolutely my constituents. I hope you'll utilize my good services and so I can represent you fairly in the Knesset. Good evening.
Thank you, Professor Tal. Good luck. And we'll stay together for a little bit longer to answer a couple of the questions that were raised and look forward to having you with us soon.
Bye-bye.
Shalom. Toda. So, friends, I'll just 1 second. Let me mute everybody. Okay. So I'll just say one more sentence in following on the previous question, and then move to the questions that were posed by Rabbi Ira Yudovin and by Ron Cohen, and then we'll see if we have time for anything else. So Haredization process of Israel, given the projections, will have far-reaching impact on the economy, on the security, since whatever and however well-meaning Professor Tal is, at this point, they're not serving. The new bill that was just submitted by the government sees even lower participation of the ultra-Orthodox in the army and civil service than before. And it will have a devastating effect on the larger questions that do not involve pluralism per se, but gender equality, Israel-diaspora relations, and the education. All these issues are going to be adversely impacted. And as Professor Dan Ben David said, to us when he spoke, not only is the projection that this will bring Israel closer to pshitat regel,
bankruptcy.
Bankruptcy. Thank you, Orna. Toda, Orna. Not only closer to bankruptcy, but in a way, he says that actually is a warning, but it won't happen. It won't happen because he says, my children are not going to stay around to see it happen. Because Israelis are not going to be willing to carry such a large segment of the population. Already they're not willing to. And if you look at the Israel Religion and State Index that we publish every year, and the last one was just on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, Israelis, a large majority of Israeli Jews are saying, cut the budgets that they are already getting. And the idea that they would provide or they would generate greater burden on the national budget, on the taxpayers, is totally unacceptable. And therefore it will have far-reaching both demographic and political results. Rabbi Ira Yudovin is asking, Meir Azari recently sent out a fundraising letter, and by the way, those who received it and are willing to support Beit Daniel, certainly a great cause, which began with him saying that he had conducted 20 weddings in the past month. How are these registered? Well, it goes back to something we've discussed a number of times, namely the right to marriage, the right to family. The reality is that none of Rabbi Azari's weddings or other colleagues in the Reform movement, in the conservative movement, in those rabbis who are here from the Reconstructionists, from Renewal, and for that matter, secular weddings that are taking place. None of them are legally recognized and registered. They are recognized as Yeduim B'tzibur, something akin to common law marriage, but without the marriage. Namely, they live together as a household, and that entails certain obligations and certain rights. It is not identical to marriage. It does not grant them the right to be registered as married, and there is no registration of those common law marriages, so to speak, or as it is usually referred to in Israel as domestic partnerships. So Rabbi Azari, indeed, as he said, is conducting numerous weddings. It's extremely popular in Tel Aviv, but it's because more and more Israelis are protesting the monopoly of the chief rabbinate by opting out and willing to either combine a reform wedding with traveling overseas and getting civilly married and registering that marriage based on private international law, conflict of laws, or however you want to call it, or feel that they are married in terms of their emotional and mental outlook, but the state does not recognize them as married. I think that I mentioned here once before and will dedicate more time to it in the future. One of the areas that Chidush is very involved with is this new window of opportunity that opened up in Utah, with Utah County, Utah, offering a revolutionary approach to marriage, namely, you can now, through Utah County, wherever you are in the world, you can register, you can obtain marriage license, and you can marry online. The marriage officiant needs to be in Utah, but other than that, the couple, the witnesses, they can be wherever in the world. There are already hundreds of Israeli couples that marry this way, except our good Minister of the Interior, Ayelet Shaked, that Professor Tal mentioned. However much she may claim to be secular, she isn't. She isn't in the sense that she does not follow secular values. She does not follow liberal values. She does not follow religious freedom values. In her view, and I can say it because she has repeated it both orally and in writing, the law governing marriage in Israel should remain din Torah, should remain religious Orthodox law as interpreted by the chief rabbinate. So she too, following Rabbi Deri, is refusing to register those Utah weddings, even though they hold and submit official Utah state marriage certificates that are confirmed with an apostille stamp, namely showing that they were signed by the official authorities that are authorized to sign marriage certificates in Utah. And we at Chidush are litigating two cases, one in the Jerusalem Administrative Court and one we just submitted last week in the Tel Aviv Administrative Court, challenging the Ministry of the Interior and the Population Registry Law for their, what we consider illegal refusal, influenced by ulterior reasons that have nothing to do with the law, and as I say, refusing to register those weddings. If you look, a couple days ago, there was an op-ed written by an immigrant from the US, and those of you who receive our newsletter will see it tomorrow in the bi-weekly newsletter. And if you have not been receiving our newsletter, please let me know. We'll love to put you on our mailing list. But she just published an op-ed describing her own experience coming on Aliyah from the States and falling in love in Israel with an Israeli, not being able to marry, having to go back to Maine, where her family is from, and having to marry there. And she's saying, this is unacceptable. And actually, we appreciate very much, because in order to further substantiate her conviction that most Israelis support her plea and support the notion of marriage freedom and religious freedom, she is linking her article to our findings in the 2021 Israel Religion and State Index that shows once again that the overwhelming majority of Israelis want marriage freedom and support civil marriage and non-Orthodox marriage. And Ron Cohen's question is, what is the projection for the population in the settlements in 2065? So I don't remember if the Central Bureau of Statistics projections included that kind of breakdown. Maybe it did. I can check it, and I'll certainly let you know. And if others are interested, I'll post it. But one thing that you may not be aware of is that most of the residents in the territories are ultra-Orthodox. There are about 500,000 residents in Judea and Samaria now. And most of them are ultra-Orthodox, not only or not primarily because there is an affinity, there is a link between right-wing religious views and right-wing political views, as we have demonstrated in the Religion and State Index. And there is an overlap here, but because they have no alternative, because housing is so rare, especially in such areas of concentration such as Bnei Brak, or such as Mea Shearim or Petach Tikva, where they would like to live, where their family members live, and they go into the territories and into the settlements, and the settlements are not the small settlements, but rather the towns, Modi'in Elite, Beitar Elite. There are Haredi towns that are practically 100% Haredi, large towns, cities. And they go there because that offers them high subsidizing by the government and cheap housing. So the question of the growth of the settlements is again directly connected to the area of conflict of religion and state, and the reality that, as I mentioned before, that whereas in the Haredi community, the birth rate is about 6.5 children per family, compared to about 2.1 in the non-Haredi community. All right. I think that I'm certainly willing to go further, but I see that our numbers have dwindled, and I don't want to abuse your intention to join and hear Alon Tal, who unfortunately was not able to spend more time with us. So we'll look forward to being with Alon in the near future. And we thank you for participating. We thank Ruach Chidush, Rabbis and Kendes for Religious Freedom and Equality in Israel, J-Plan, the Jewish Pluralism, Legal Action Network, and the American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists. As before, if you have any question, any comment, any request that involves future topics, future speakers in these series, or anything else that has to do with the battle for religious freedom and pluralism, please convey them to us, to me personally, or to info@chidush.org, or as a response to the follow-up email that you will be receiving with the recording of this session. And for the time being, thank you all. It's wonderful to see so many of you and so many news participants who I guess came because Alon Tal was rightly of interest for them. And we'll see each other soon. Shalom, and from Jerusalem, I'm saying Laila Tov.